I think if we take a look at the biblical story and account of David and Bathsheba, this will play out very plainly before our eyes. From 2 Samuel chapter 11. In the spring of the year, when kings normally go out to war, David sent Joab and the Israelite army to fight the Ammonites. They destroyed the Ammonite army and laid siege to the city of Rabbah. However, David stayed behind in Jerusalem. Problem 1. Late one afternoon, after his midday rest, David got out of his bed and was walking on the roof of his palace. Problem 2. As he looked out over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. Problem 3. He sent someone to find out who she was and was told, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Eliam, and the wife of Uriah the Hittite." And then David sent messengers to get her, and when she came to the palace, he slept with her. Problem 4, 5, 6, and 7. She had just completed the purification rites after having her menstrual period, and then she returned. She had just completed the purification rites after having her menstrual period, and then she returned home. Later, when Bathsheba discovered she was pregnant, she sent David a message saying, "David, I'm pregnant." Problem 4,000. Then David sent word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." I've got a plan on how I can get out of this. So Joab sent David. When Uriah arrived, David asked him how Joab and the army were getting along and how the war was progressing. By the way, that's a problem. He should have known full well. He should have been there with his men. That goes back to problem 1. Then he told Uriah, "Go home and relax." See, that's the scheme. David even sent a gift to Uriah after he left the palace. But Uriah didn't go home. He slept that night at the palace entrance with the king's palace guard. When David heard that Uriah had not gone home, he summoned him and asked, "What's the matter? Why didn't you go home last night after being away for so long?" And Uriah replied, and by the way, this is a man who was standing in righteousness before God, "The ark and the armies of Israel and Judah are living in tents, and Joab and my master's men are camping in the open fields. How could I go home to wine and dine and sleep with my wife? I swear that I would never do such a thing." Of course, that's exactly what David was doing. "Well, stay here today," David told him, "and tomorrow you may return to the army." So Uriah stayed in Jerusalem that day and the next. Then David invited him to dinner and got him drunk. There's another problem. But even then, he couldn't get Uriah to go home to his wife. Again, he slept at the palace entrance with the king and the palace guard. So the next morning, David wrote a letter to Joab and gave it to Uriah to deliver. The letter instructed Joab, "Station Uriah on the front lines where the battle is fiercest." You get the picture? David wants to kill Uriah. So he writes this to Joab, hands the death sentence to Uriah himself, and says, "Hey, here's a note to Joab. Please take it to him." He carries his own death sentence to the one who is forced to carry it out. So Joab assigned Uriah to a spot close to the city wall where he knew the enemy's strongest men were fighting. And when the enemy soldiers came out of the city to fight, Uriah the Hittite was killed along with several other Israelite soldiers. Then Joab sent a battle report to David, and he told his messenger to report all the news of the battle to the king. But he might get angry and ask, "Why in the world did the troops go so close to the city? Didn't they know there would be shooting from the walls? Wasn't Abimelech, son of Gideon, killed at Thebez by a woman who threw a millstone down on him from the wall? Why would you get so close to the wall?" Then tell him Uriah the Hittite was killed too. So the messenger went to Jerusalem and gave a complete report to David. "The enemy came out against us at the open fields," he said, "and as we chased them back to the city gate, the archers on the wall shot arrows at us. Some of the king's men were killed, including Uriah the Hittite." "Well, tell Joab not to be discouraged," David said. "The sword devours this one today and that one tomorrow. Fight harder next time and conquer the city." When Uriah's wife heard that her husband was dead, she mourned for him. And when the period of mourning was over, David sent for her and brought her to the palace, and she became one of the wives. When she gave birth to a son, but the Lord was displeased with what David had done. There was a litany of problems that David had going on, and they all played out at the same time. David, first of all, was tempted to stay home rather than go to war. David was a valiant, mighty warrior. He was tasked with the job of leading the people of God in taking and conquering the land. He had begun the process with Goliath defeating the Philistines, and it was a process that he was tasked to carry out. He was the king who would conquer the land and take it for the people of God. And instead of doing that which God called him, he heard a voice inside of him. Oh, this battle will be easy. You need a break. Just stay home. Send the men. They can do this one without you. Ooh, that sounds pretty nice. David, I think you will need to rest. You should be home and in your palace where you can take an afternoon nap every day. You should be living the life of luxury. You don't have to go fight the wars anymore. David stayed home. He fell prey to that temptation. And that was the beginning of the problem. Then he was tempted when he caught a glimpse of this beautiful woman bathing. Now listen, I can't fault David for seeing something beautiful. I mean, it's his fault that he was home. It's his fault that he was up walking around the palace top. But it's not his fault that she was taking a bath. But I'll tell you what is problematic. And there's several things that were problematic. And here's the picture that I get. I don't know. Sometimes you got to use some imagination when we read Scripture. Here he is, walking around the top of his palace. He's up on the castle top, right? Walking around. What's he thinking? What's he doing? See, in my mind, what I see is someone who's walking around who's gotten to be pretty full of himself. And he's pretty excited about everything that he sees because he is in charge of it all. This is my kingdom, and it is good to be king. And while he was walking around, seeing all that is his, he spies a beautiful woman bathing on the roof of her house. And because he thinks it's all his, he doesn't look away. He kind of is captivated by her, and he thinks that maybe she should belong to him. And instead of bouncing his eyes away, David does one of these. Now, listen, I know you ladies don't really get this. I understand. Because God, by and large, hasn't wired ladies to be triggered by sight. But guys mostly are triggered by sight. And David's trigger was pulled. And he couldn't back off once it was pulled. It wasn't David's fault that he saw Bathsheba. It was his fault that he didn't turn away. Do you understand what I'm saying? Now, this is true for kings. It's also true for people like you and me. And so, guys, next time you're walking around the Chambersburg Mall or sitting at a football game, watching all the traffic go by, if all of a sudden your eyes latch on to something that is beautiful to you, you got to bounce your eyes away. Just look away. Just look away. I have noticed that people don't always dress very appropriately. Have you noticed this? And that there is more skin showing today than ever before. And that is dangerous to guys. And so, guys, now you know your responsibility is to turn away. Guys, what's your responsibility? Yeah, you really like that one, didn't you? Well, listen, we got to do it. Otherwise, we will go down a path that leads to death. We will go down a path that leads to death. Turn away. Learn to bounce your eyes away or you will be in trouble. He was captivated by her and in the end decided he had to have her regardless of the circumstances. He called for her. He brought her to him. And even though he was a married man and she was a married woman, her husband was one of his valiant warriors. He said, I'm going to have her, and he took her. And he took her. And so he commits adultery, and he engages in sex outside of marriage, and he forces her to commit sin by committing adultery and engaging in this outside of the boundaries and the vows of her marriage. This is problems just all over the place. But he decided he had to have her, and since he was the king, he just thought he should take her.